Hi, y'all. Welcome to Lit Whiskey Wednesday, where the lit stands for literature. This is your host, Adrian Martinez, coming to you live from Studio B. Today, we have an onion of an episode, and if you get that reference, you're a real one. And if you don't get that reference, you probably should watch more kids' movies. But before we hop onto today's episode, I do have an announcement. I kind of alluded to this on last week's episode when Raymond and I talked about Weller Special Reserve and Harry Potter, but I think that the easiest way for me to do this show is to break it up into seasons. Originally, I was intending to do it perpetually for as long as I could, but the more that I've sat with the idea, the more that I've thought about it, the more I realized the easiest way for me to do this is to break it up into seasons, and I don't think I have neither the wallet nor the liver to afford to be able to do that on perpetuity and be buying new bottles every week. I really do think that breaking up the show into seasons is going to be the best way for me to do this because it will allow me to sit with what I'm reading and really analyze it, as well as take my time with the whiskeys, smell them, taste them, take notes, and not be rushing. And ultimately, what that will do is ensure that each episode is as high as quality as I can make them. With that announcement out of the way, let's hop on to today's episode. And let me tell you, the onion analogy is no joke, because you sit with this whiskey, it's a bourbon actually, and at first you get those classic bourbon notes and flavors, and I guess let me define what classic bourbon really means, because there's three main characteristics of that flavor profile that makes bourbon. It is oak, caramel, and vanilla. So as far as oak is concerned, bourbon, by law, needs to be aged in new oak barrels that have been charred for anywhere between 15 to 55 seconds. And sitting for many years in that wooden barrel really transfers that oaky, woody flavor onto the whiskey. As far as a caramel goes, I mentioned earlier that the whiskey barrels, or the bourbon barrels, need to be charred. That means that they're literally lit on fire. If you have the chance, I highly encourage you to look this up on YouTube or TikTok, because it's a sight. Like, think 4th of July, but condensed to like a barrel. It's actually kind of entertaining. And lastly, the vanilla. I don't know if you can say it's exactly vanilla, but it's like a sweetness. And a lot of that comes because bourbon, by law, needs to be made up of, or like the grain mash bill, needs to be made up of at least 51% corn. The other 49% can be a combination of whatever grain you want. It can be more corn, it could be wheat, it could be rye, malted barley, unmalted barley, rice, quinoa. I've heard of amaranth once, but the majority of the grain in that mash bill needs to be corn. And because of that, the bourbon will have a natural sweetness that a lot of people associate with vanilla. So those are the three main flavor profiles that a classic bourbon has. And Buffalo Trace, which is the bourbon that we will talk about today, is no exception. Buffalo Trace is the longest continuously ran distillery in the United States. It was established in 1812 by Harrison Blanton. That name should sound familiar to a lot of you that are in the whiskey and bourbon hunt game, but think about what I'm saying for a second. This distillery was established in 1812. It has been continuously running for 214 years. I don't think I could continuously run for 214 minutes. That is absolutely insane that this distillery has been ran without stopping for that long. It survived things like, World War II, the Great Depression, Prohibition, all of these things that were an impact to the whiskey industry, and it survived. It's been around for that long. And I think that the culture that Buffalo Trace gives is a true testament to surviving for that long. I said earlier that Buffalo Trace, the flagship product, so like the main bottle of Buffalo Trace, has those classic bourbon notes and flavors. A lot of people will want to use that bourbon as a mixer. You will put Coke or something else to make a cocktail. And you know what? There's absolutely nothing wrong with enjoying your whiskey that way. But here's the thing. Buffalo Trace, to me, is an onion. Because the more that you sit with it, the longer that you smell it, the more that you taste it, the more flavors you're able to pick out. The first time that I ever tried Buffalo Trace, I only got alcohol. It had ethanol, alcohol, that makes you make that ugh face. The second time that I ever tried it, I got nothing but those three flavors that make bourbon. You know, bourbon, caramel, oak, and vanilla. But the third time was actually very unique because I was able to go with my wife and at that point she was my fiance, and my now father-in-law. We went to the Buffalo Trace Distillery, and it was kind of neat because they were doing a free tasting, so you could just go, show up, and they would give you a free tasting of 5 of their different products. And oh my goodness, if you can do that, if you can go to the distillery and get that tasting, 10 out of 10 would recommend. Because you start out with Buffalo Trace, but they give you other stuff that is just phenomenal. One that is not a whiskey, but is still incredible, is their bourbon cream. Let me tell you, add bourbon cream to a little bit of root beer and vanilla ice cream, and you're going to have a boozy Sunday. Anyways, that time that we went to the distillery, I was able to just really sit with it and take my time. There was something in there that I was originally not able to pick out. But I turned to my father-in-law and I told him, there's something in there. It's not caramel, it's not vanilla, it's not oak. There's something. And I don't know what it is. And the guy that was leading the tasting just looked at me and he was almost like wanting to laugh. And he told me, hey, take a bottle, or like go buy a bottle, take it home, really take your time with it. So I did. And after sitting with it, watching some TV, really just trying to analyze it, I was like, I know this smell. But I don't know from where. And it finally hit me. It was leather. That absolutely blew my mind. Because how in the world do you get leather into bourbon? Because bourbon, you can't add anything by law. It is only the water, the grain, the wood, and the weather fluctuations. Which, like, how would that affect the bourbon to taste so differently? But it really does. And then the next time that I smelled it, I got pear. Like, I got fruit. And to tell you the truth, the leather scent did not transfer to the palate. You know, thank God. Who wants to drink a leather seat? But the pear and fruity flavor did. But that was like my 4th time tasting Buffalo Trace. It took me a while. And it made no sense. I still, it was crazy to me, and it still is crazy to me, that the more that I sat with it, the more that I really tried to analyze the bourbon, the more flavors that I found. And I was telling all of this to one of my best friends, and he told me I use Buffalo Trace with Diet Coke. And I could not wrap my head around it, but he told me that's what makes the experience even better. Buffalo Trace is a bourbon that the first time that you try it, you can enjoy it. You smell it, you sip it, you get that typical bourbon flavor, and it doesn't have to get any deeper than that for you to enjoy it. The more you sit with it, the more that you're able to pick out, the more that you're able to go, aha! And you realize there is just much more that meets the eye. Well, in this case, the nose and the palate. But there is just much more there that can allow you to enjoy Buffalo Trace in different ways. And that is what ties it to today's book. The book that I am pairing with Buffalo Trace is The Giver by Lois Lowry. I actually had the privilege, and let me emphasize on the word privilege, to get to meet her. She did a tour here in Texas to promote her latest book. This was, like 4 years ago. And I found out about the event by a complete accident. I was, I think, scrolling on Facebook or something. And the bookstore that was hosting the event made a post. The name Lois Lowry stood out because I absolutely loved The Giver growing up. I will never forget reading it for the first time. It was in 7th grade in Ms. De La Cruz's English class. Shout out to Ms. De La Cruz, absolute amazing teacher, genuinely cares for her students. I remember her passing out the copies of the book to each of us for us to read, and she gave us a warning. You are going to hate the ending of the book. By the end of the book, literally on the last paragraph, I think like 2 or 3 kids just yelled, "No, that can't be how it ends. No, I do not accept that." And I was laughing because I thought it was a great ending. Spoiler alert, you don't find out if, at least in this book, in the ending, if Jonas, the main character, and Gabriel, the baby that he's taking care of, survive. And that drives people bananas. They need to have that conclusion, that ending. They need to know what happens. And, well, surprise, surprise, stick with it, because there are 3 other books in the series, and you find out what happens. So, core memories for me, core middle school memories. Man, that makes me sound like a nerd. So, on the off chance that you haven't read The Giver, let me give you a brief description of what it's about. The Giver takes place in a futuristic society where people see in black and white. The society, or the community, controls everything. They have absolutely, or the people in the community have no choice of what they do for work, who they make a family with, and not even make a family. They don't have children of their own. There are dedicated people to make babies, I guess, and those babies are then distributed to the families. And it's a very bland type of living. There are no emotions. There are nothing that make people really unique. Jonas, our main character, is, of course, different. He can see in color. He's just different, and they make that apparent from the beginning. Well, actually, no. They make that apparent from somewhere in the middle. You start realizing there's something to Jonas. There's something that is not quite like the rest of them. And you find this out definitively in the ceremony where the 12-year-olds, I think they're 12 going to 13 or 11 going to 12, I don't remember the exact number, but they're all assigned a job that they will do for the rest of their lives. Jonas is skipped, and so he starts freaking out because, who wouldn't? Everyone's being told, oh, you're going to be a dentist, you're going to be a lawyer, you're going to be a doctor, you're going to be a janitor, you're going to be this, you're going to be that. So completely understandable why he's freaking out. And at the very end, he's told, you're going to be the next receiver of memories. What in the world does that mean? You find out with him because he goes to the giver of memories. The person that, and again, spoiler warning in case you haven't read this book, and even if you have, or even if I'm spoiling things, I still highly recommend that you read it. It is an absolute fantastic read. Newbery Prize winner. Absolutely amazing. So yeah, spoiler warning. The giver of memories is the person that holds all of the memories and all of the knowledge and all of the emotions of the world before the society. So all the love, all the happiness, all the sadness, all destruction, war, famine, rainbows, heat, warmth, cold. Literally everything that a person can feel, this person, the giver of memories, holds. He is the keeper of all of this. So when he starts giving Jonas all these memories and all these feelings, he at first obviously very overwhelmed. For over a decade, he has lived in a society that hasn't allowed for any of this. They even control the language or the diction that you're allowed to say. So when he asks his parents, well, parents is not even the right word, his guardians, do you love me? They immediately retaliate with precision of language. Use precise language. Love is an outdated term that doesn't apply to anybody. So it's like, okay, and they even take it further. Do I, want to protect you? Yes. Do I appreciate you? Yes, but love doesn't apply. So all of this is new to Jonas, and it's obviously very overwhelming. So Jonas realizes that the world that was so black and white, that was so simple at the beginning, is a mere fraction of reality, of what people used to experience, the good and the bad. So he escapes, and by escaping, all the memories and all the feelings disperse from him onto everybody else. And that is what the community was actively trying to avoid, so that they could control the people and they could control just everything and have a happy-go-lucky society. Well, not even happy. They have a society that just functions, and I guess for lack of a better term, that is efficient, because there's no sadness, there's no loss, there's none of that negativity that we as humans deal with on a day-to-day basis. So, dear listener, that was a very high level, very, very, very simplified summary of The Giver. Again, highly encourage you to go read it if you haven't, because it is a wonderful story. And me in 7th grade, when we first read it, I thought it was a really cool science fiction story. Yeah, that was the end of that. For some reason, I got really into reading when the pandemic started. And The Giver was one of those books that I picked up because I remember how much I loved it as a kid, as a middle schooler. And I was like, wait a second. This is not as, well, black or white as it seems. There's more to this. There's a deeper layer, a deeper level. And you realize that the story is not just a science fiction story. It is social commentary on the struggles between control and freedom. And this raises the ethical questions about comfort versus truth, status quo versus different. And when you start thinking about it, Jonas didn't escape so that people could gain the negative memories and the negative feelings of loss, of hatred. The negative things are balanced by the positive things. You can't experience hate without love. You can't experience sadness without happiness. You can't experience loss without gain. It is part of life. And this book is a social commentary on that balance and going out there and experiencing that balance, not just going with what you're told. And by reading this book, especially as an adult, or maybe you're more mature than I am and you reread this, or you read this for the first time as a teenager and you realize this, but by really sitting with this book and analyzing what it's saying beyond the story, you realize that it's asking the big question. What do we gain or lose from just going along with what we're told, without going out and exploring and living life to the fullest the way that we are meant to? And that's how this book compares to the whiskey. On the first go around, you might just get simplicity. You might get black and white. You get bourbon, caramel, oak, vanilla, that's it. You combine it with Coke. The first time that you read The Giver, you're like, oh, cool, science fiction. Neat, I enjoyed it. But the more that you sit with it, the more that you analyze it, the more that you really start thinking about what's beneath the surface, is when you start realizing this is not just a mere whiskey. This is not just a mere book. There is more to it. It is saying more. It is telling a deeper story than that is just present in front of you. And it doesn't even have to be as meta as that. You realize that in the story, the community that Jonas is living in is the whiskey. It's simple, and you enjoy it, and at a surface level, it's great. It is just that. But the more that you advance, or the more that you experience, the more that Jonas realizes that there's more to life. There's more to life than just living a job and, raising the kids that aren't even yours, and a wife that you didn't even choose. There's more to it. And I think that those are the deeper notes that you find in the whiskey. That leather, that fruit. The more that you sit with it, the more that you analyze, the more that you realize there's more. Alright, folks, that is all that I have for you today. At a surface level, good book, good whiskey. But when you sit with it, when you analyze, when you really start thinking about it, you realize that there's more to the book, more to the whiskey, and more to life. And once again, I wanted to give a shout out to Ms. De La Cruz, wonderful teacher. I had her as a teacher maybe 15 years ago, and that book, not just that book, but we also read Telltale Heart, The Monkey's Paw, all these books that stayed with me 15 years after the fact. So, Ms. De La Cruz, you're doing an incredible job. Thank you for all you do. Alright, y'all, thank you again for listening. My name is Adrian Martinez, coming to you live from Studio B, and this was Lit Whiskey Wednesday. I will catch you on the next one.